Hello, hello, hello. Let's take a look at what's happening this week. This week we have Mercury and Venus conjunction. We have the Virgo Lunar Eclipse. We have Saturn Morning Star. And we also have the Sun conjunct the North Node. Interesting week. Things are vamping up. But with that, let's take a look at our Monday. As always, Monday is the moon's day. Today is March 10th, 2025. The moon is waxing in Leo. She's in Saturn's decan and Jupiter's terms, moving towards a Mercury and Venus trine and a Jupiter sextile. Good stuff for the moon, especially a moon in Leo. I think I've talked about this a couple weeks back, but whenever the moon is in Leo now, the moon is under this condition called cleansed, meaning that she is averse from both Mars and Saturn, so she can't really see the bad things in her way. She can only see the good things, especially from Leo, because like I said, in Leo, the moon will trine Venus and then sextile Jupiter as well. So she really just moves from this good thing to another good thing. It's a great time. But this moon is not like the others. I feel like for a couple different reasons. I think the Uranus square that will also build up later as the moon moves throughout Leo is something that should not be understated. And the reason why I say that is because I think the moon being so potent with so much help from the benefics, having that Uranus square can provide the moon with a lot of resources to really shake things up in Leo a little bit. And so I think that this can be one of those days where things can be a little bombastic and explosive and exciting and thunderous, to use a Uranus-Jupiter sort of word. And I feel like there's a lot that can be achieved with that. I think that especially considering that the moon is waxing and all of those things, and we're moving towards a lunar eclipse very soon, I feel like today can be one of those days to give that last push that you need towards a certain direction that you want to head towards. I think that this is why in the image, the moon looks very determined and ready for pretty much anything. She has like this golden scepter in hand. Her hair is just going wild. She looks powerful and determined. And I think that could be you today if you know how to wield this transit. But on that note, I think this is why I give today a 1 difficulty and a 3 utility. I think the lack of difficulty, like I said, is because the moon is averse from the malefics. This does not mean that bad things don't exist, but it means that bad things are not part of the considerations of today. So you're really able to just go about your day like you originally planned and all is good. Maybe not as you originally planned because of the Uranus thing building up tomorrow, but for the most part, it's moving you towards good directions. The utility, like I said, is in very much just shining and pursuing the thing that you yourself want. I think that the moon being in Leo, the moon being in fire signs, Venus retrograde and all those things can really push for that. So go do whatever you want to do today. Some of the signs that this is especially important to would be Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. All right, moving on to March 11th. This is our Tuesday with Mars in Cancer, slow, fallen in his element, and Mercury's decan end terms, moving towards a Saturn trine like I've been talking about. And you're gonna notice this. For most of the month, the Saturn trine will be the thing that we're talking about, so there won't be much to talk about with Mars. For many reasons. One is because we're really just revising things that we've already done with Mars and Cancer. And the other one is because Mars is really slow. So we're getting a fair bit of time to really get all this stuff together. And so this is why I have in the image just Mars now, not so much resting anymore, but wielding his blade. But you're gonna notice that Saturn is still fuzzy in the background. Mars himself is still a little fuzzy, but it's almost like Mars is getting up to do something. It's not like it's doing much, but it's getting up, it's getting there. So I think that today, as we build towards the Saturn trine, we can really get the sense that things are indeed moving forward. If we're even talking about Saturn potentially being this authority figure that can provide some wisdom for Mars that will be useful in the rest of his journey. It can be that today maybe you see who that person is. You can see them off in the distance, whether literally or metaphorically, but you're not quite having that exchange just yet. Things are really building up, but we haven't arrived yet. But it's for those reasons that I gave today a 2 difficulty and a 1.5 utility. Like I said, not too complex of a day. There's not much happening. And yeah, I think the difficulty is just dealing with the same over and over and over again, and also not yet having the momentum that you need to be able to fully close that up yet. But the utility is in that momentum picking up. I know I'll keep repeating this, but Saturn and Mars are slow. What can I do? I cannot make them go faster. But the signs that should be paying attention to today, regardless of the slowness and the lack of pizzazz that the day possesses, are Aries, Cancer, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Aquarius. All right, getting to more interesting events, we get to our March 12th. This is our Wednesday with Mercury in Aries, out of sect and element, like I've been saying. Mercury is also peregrine by extension, slow in Mars's decan and Venus's terms, enclosed and somewhat received by a Venus conjunction and a Jupiter sextile. This is one of my favorite days for Mercury, especially because it's really close to the retrograde station, and I was sitting with this and it was very interesting because last week I talked how Mercury is being a really bad influence for almost the entirety of the zodiac right now. But today, with this benefic enclosure and reception from both Venus and Jupiter, even though Jupiter's doesn't quite complete just yet, might make it so Mercury, despite being an evil little shit, actually gets away with it in some wild ways. Maybe there's some consequences later for these actions, but today I feel like Mercury does get away with murder, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on who you are. Are you Mercury or the murdered? Who knows? But this is what I wanted to capture with the image. We just have Mercury in their skateboard, just being cool and radical, just going up on this ramp and doing ollies and all sorts of shit. In the background, there's these prickly cacti that evoke this sort of like Mars risky situation, because if Mercury falls, Mercury will like really scrape itself all over these cacti. It will really hurt. It will be really difficult, but nothing happens. Mercury executes it perfectly, and somebody is in the corner taking a video of it to proliferate it on the internet. And I think that that's maybe the Jupiter-Venus enclosure, especially in Aries, a sign that really likes to throw a little bit of a show. I think it's like Mercury gets away with murder, but Mercury also gets really popular because of that. And I think that might be the challenge of the day. It's like you do something that you shouldn't be doing, you get away with it, and everybody sees it, and now you have to keep sure that nobody finds out that what you were doing wasn't supposed to be done. So yeah, I think that that's the tricky thing of the day, just being celebrated for something that maybe you shouldn't be celebrated, and then kind of wrestling with potentially having to deal with the consequences of that in the future. The retrograde is not here yet, so we'll see what's in store for Mercury in the next couple of weeks coming up. But it is for those reasons that I gave today a 2.5 difficulty and a 3.5 utility, actually. I know, it sounds a little spooky of a day and a little risky of a day, but I think that there is a lot that can be done. I think the important thing here, and just to consider the difficulty, is that in getting a lot of eyes on you, you have the responsibility to show the best of you to people. And I think that's the difficulty of the day, because Mercury is really tempted to do something that maybe Mercury shouldn't be doing. Now, the utility is in getting all those eyes on you, and maybe even getting celebrated for something that you've done. Just keep in mind that even if you didn't do anything shady, that the retrograde might make this a more complex scenario than it would be otherwise. But still, pretty interesting time nonetheless. And some of the signs that should focus or maybe will benefit from this transit are Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Pisces. All right, getting into our Thursday with Jupiter's day. Jupiter's still in Gemini, and detriment in his element in Mars's decan and Venus's terms, and somewhat mutually receiving Mercury through a sextile. So here we have a continuation of that story. Venus and Mercury are still out there doing cool things. Maybe Venus was the person taking the video for Mercury as Mercury did the crazy ollies in the fucking cactus reservation or whatever. Jupiter, on the other hand, might be the vast amounts of people tuning into that video. If you remember last week, Jupiter was just watching Mercury and Venus giggle around from his window. Now, Jupiter's outside and he sees that the neighbor's mailing box is on fire. Who set this on fire? Was it Venus? Was it Mercury? Or were they just around when that was happening? It's kind of hard to tell. And so Jupiter's still kind of abiding by whatever these troublesome children are doing over there. I think it's really interesting also that, again, the sextile will not complete. So there's this promise of Jupiter kind of keeping things together for Mercury and Venus. But once the sun comes around into Aries and we're solidly in Aries season, and both Venus and Mercury have their Cazimis and all of that, that's when something will really whip those two into shape. Jupiter, on the other hand, is just watching. So I think this can be a continuation of last week. If you're a Jupiter person, you might just be watching as the world or people do these crazy wild things as you just kind of watch by in silence because you don't want to do too much. Although Jupiter is now really picking up speed, so maybe eventually Jupiter will do something about this. After these retrogrades go by, after this eclipse season goes by, after all that's situated, Jupiter will revisit this Mercury-Venus situation and we'll see what will come of that then. But for now, we're just watching. But on that note, I think that's why I gave today a 2 difficulty and a 2 utility. To summarize the difficulty and utility, I think it's just complacency. It's one of those days where it's really easy to just remove yourself from the fuckery that other people are doing. Especially if you're a Jupiter person, you can just rest assured that whatever's happening will come to you much, much later on. And so you can worry more about getting back to work and getting your life situated, because Jupiter has enough to figure out right now. But yeah, so do that, I guess. With that said, some of the signs I should focus on today are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. All right, moving on to March 14th. This is our Venus day, but also our lunar eclipse day. We have Venus in Aries. She's also out of element, in detriment, Mars's decan in her own terms, separating from a Mercury conjunction, and retrograde. I really want to talk about the lunar eclipse for this one, because the thing that was interesting about the lunar eclipse for me is that I always cast my charts for 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude. So you're seeing the chart of when the sun rises right in the middle of the earth, like right smack dab in the middle. It's like the average sunrise chart for wherever we are in the world, because it's the middle of the earth. But the interesting thing about today is that as the sun is rising there, we also have the eclipse happening at the same exact time, the lunar eclipse. So to me, this a lunar eclipse in Virgo with the south node really felt like a word vomit of a sort, or just like barfing out a manifesto into the world. Like these are your ideas. This is what you think fixing the world would require, or this is what you think the rules should be. And these are all the tiny little things that we don't need in our society anymore that need to leave. And this is what I have in the image. It's Venus, after having had her moment with Mercury, who's the ruler of the lunation also, heading back to Pisces. As you can see, she's walking towards the ocean, but she's still in this cacti zone that Mercury was also in the other day. And as you're going to continue to see, I feel like this letter that Venus is holding is very important, because yes, Venus had her moment of youth with Mercury last week. They got up to all sorts of shady business, they did all sorts of things, and Venus really got to learn about herself, who she is, and who she really wants to continue to grow into. And I think that if we even just read Venus in a global sense as our agreements or as our ideas of fairness and all those things, having the retrograde and having all that happen coupled with the eclipse can really signal a revision of this. So I really want you to look at this image as maybe Venus walking towards the sun or walking towards Pisces, but she's bringing a new set of rules and ideas that will really dictate how things need to be done now. This is really Venus getting vocal about her needs. She's going back to Pisces. She now very much is on a mission. So we'll see what that mission is as we continue along this Venus retrograde journey. But it is for those reasons that I gave today a 3.5 difficulty and a 2 utility. If it weren't for the eclipse, it really would be a 2.5, but the eclipse adds an extra point in there just because eclipses can be very tumultuous and very disorienting and a little chaotic. I think the difficulty of the day is really coming to terms with those new sets of rules. Like we've been talking about how this Venus retrograde was so much about Venus coming to terms with her needs and her wants and her desires and all those things, the things that she wants that does not involve anyone else, I think is what I said. And I think the difficulty of today is the due date for that coming up really soon. I think by the time Venus has the cazimi with the sun, that's really when our due date for the delivery of those needs are. And I think the difficulty of today is really kind of sitting down to write those down and figure out how you're going to communicate those to your partners, whether romantic or not. And I think the utility of the day with the eclipse isn't really shedding a lot of that stuff away. Anything that's not up to Venus's terms and conditions now needs to be let go. And I think today can be a really useful day for that. But on that note, the signs that really should pay attention to this are Aries, Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Libra, and Pisces. All right, now moving on to our weekend. It is March 15th. This is Saturn's day. Saturn still in Pisces, out of element, Peregrine, and Mars's decan in terms, separating from a Sun conjunction, and soon being received by Mars through a trine. And this thing is going to be pretty simple and straightforward. I think that the biggest thing that I was leaning on for today is this idea of the new Saturn, or the Saturn cazimi that just happened not too long ago. The reason why this is a big deal is that Saturn now becomes more temperate, we say, because Saturn will be rising earlier than the sun, meaning that Saturn will be above the horizon through most of the day. And this is said to make Saturn a little less cranky, a little less unyielding, a little less harsh and strict and difficult, and more constructive and forward-thinking, and really more invested in building and creating rules and regulations and doing all that stuff, as opposed to bringing us down, which is nice. So I think that in the image, what I was trying to capture was that moment just post-cazimi. It's like the post-cazimi clarity, if you will. Just because the sun is very much the light of the world. Like, the only reason why we're able to see anything is because of the sun. And so this image, I almost want to just a close-up on Saturn's eyes as she sees the way forward. Because if you remember last week, and I think the week prior, Saturn was just entering into this ominous tunnel in Pisces that leads her into Aries. But that tunnel kind of seemed endless and elusive in some ways, but now with the Saturn cazimi, I feel like Saturn can really see the way forward. And I feel like that's even further emphasized by the fact that Mars, which rules the decan in the terms and the element that Saturn is in, will be trying to Saturn almost this whole time. So it's almost like Saturn is getting her hand held as she moves throughout the last degrees of Pisces. We talked about how Saturn was really peregrine and lost for most of this journey, and it's really nice to have somebody show Saturn some direction. It's Mars, which can be a little bit on the survival and the anxious and the fearful side of things, but getting that fear to propel us forward sometimes can be a very useful thing to have. And it's for those reasons that I gave today a 3 difficulty and a 2.5 utility. I think the difficulty is seeing how hard it's gonna be to get to the next phase of or collective or personal stories. The utility, though, is, I guess, in being held by Mars as we go there. Mars can be determination, Mars can be fear as well, Mars can be survival, Mars can be hunger, Mars can be all those things. They're not necessarily good and pleasing feelings to have, but they're nonetheless the feelings that really get us to get up and moving. So I think that that's what we can expect in the weeks to come. Just this call to wake up. And yeah. But the signs that should be paying attention to this are Aries, Leo, Scorpio, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. All right, moving to the end of our week. This is March 16th, the last day of the week. It is Sun's day. The Sun is in Pisces, out of element, peregrine. It marches decan in terms, separating from a Saturn conjunction and conjunct the North Node. If you remember last week, the Sun was just waiting for his ship to arrive as he was carrying all these goodies to take to Aries that he will bring to Venus and Mercury, and will provide them with some resources for their retrograde journey or whatever. But it seems like the ship is in trouble now, as is the Sun with this giant octopus just messing up and fucking up a storm. And the reason why I have this there is because we're still very much in the eclipse season. It's kind of like that thing that we weren't expecting coming out of nowhere to disrupt our plans. And so the Sun now is back on his tiny little boat with no ship, unfortunately, to usher him into the shores of Aries land or whatever, where Venus and Mercury are waiting for the Sun there. The thing that I wanted to capture with the image was not only just this sense of a monster coming out of nowhere, but also this question around, is the octopus coming for the ship or is it coming for the Sun? Will the Sun be able to make it into the island? No one knows. Probably because, you know, it's the Sun and it moves into Aries every year. But still, those questions are very much in the air. Will we make it? Will we not? Think about that. On that note, this is why I gave today a 3.5 difficulty and a 1 utility. I think the difficulty is this big question of, will we make it, will we not, what's gonna happen, sort of thing. And the utility, I guess, is in just, you know, allowing some of these things to happen. I think with eclipse season, it's always hard to try and control it or try and nudge it anyway, so it's best to just like let it go and see what happens. I think this is one of those days. But some of the signs that are especially affected by this transit are Leo, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. But with that, this is our week. Let's take a look at our week at a glance. It seems like we settle at a 2.5 evenly, except there is an eclipse, so we get an extra point of difficulty there. So it's really a 3.5 to 2.5. Eclipse season is always a little bit unpredictable. You never really know how things can go. So it's always good to be prepared for things to be a little bit more tumultuous than they are usually. But for the most part, it seems like our really hard days are really just Wednesday or Friday and or Sunday. I would say especially Friday because of our eclipse. But for the most part, the useful day of the week is that Monday, like we've been talking about. And so I would really reserve all of the most important things that you gotta do this week for that one Monday. But on that note, this is the week, guys. If you're curious about any of these transits and what they mean for your rising sign specifically, I send out a newsletter about that every week. And you can find it at themercuryrising.com, where you can subscribe to my newsletter. And as always, I am Joe G, and I hope to see you next week. All right, guys, happy eclipsing. Good luck. Bye-bye.